So I want you to write this down. He said, Dave, there's three things as CEO that you should always be doing. So write this down. Number one, you should be always increasing your business. Because if your business is not increasing, it's stagnant, or worse, it's behind. You're falling behind. You're going out of business slowly. He said, number two, you should be creating cash flows. The number one reason that businesses go out of business is lack of cash flow. And number three, you should always be cashing checks. That's my favorite part. He said, grow the business, create cash flows, cash checks. He said, if you do the maintenance on your properties, and if you act, well, he said, if you act like a maintenance man and you do the maintenance on your properties, then you'll make a maintenance man wages. But if you act like the CEO and you delegate, you create a CEO salary. So that's exactly what I started doing. So I went out and I bought this property, and you know, I discovered that when I bought this property that we don't analyze multifamily properties and single-family properties the same way. With multifamily properties, we use what's called the capitalization rate. So I want you to write that down, the capitalization rate. Now, that's another Lindahl language. And what is the capitalization rate? Well, it's the return that you expect to get on your investment. The capitalization rate is the return that you expect to get on your investment. Now, how do we determine that capitalization rate? It can be somewhat confusing. So what I did is I took a very complicated formula and I broke it down to a very simple formula that I call a times 10 valuation calculation. And it's right here on your screen. What you're going to do is you're going to take the yearly income, subtract the yearly expenses, not including the mortgage. In my system, I give you 8 different and important calculations that you need to be doing to determine the value of a property and whether or not you should buy a property. Now, in this particular one, we don't use the mortgage. We'll use that mortgage on what's called cash-on-cash return. But this is the very first calculation that we look at to determine whether or not we want to get a deal. So yearly income minus yearly expenses equals net operating income. And net operating income is another very important concept because the more net operating income we have, the higher the value of the property. Because we'll take that net operating income, we'll multiply it by 10, and that's going to equal the approximate value of the property. So let's take a look at this with the first property that I bought on 25 Newton Street. The yearly income on this property was $34,000. The expenses were $15,300. The NOI was $18,700. You take that $18,700, you multiply it by 10, and that's a value of $187,000. Now, if you remember, I paid $140,000 for it. So with the stroke of a pen, I created over $47,000 in equity at the closing. Now think about that. You can do that too using this very simple technique. Now is it simple? Absolutely. Can you do this? You know you can do this. So I want to give you a very valuable lesson. The lesson is, and I discovered this very early on, is that the value of a multifamily property is not in the property itself, it's in the cash flow. I want you to write that down. That's very important. The value of a multifamily property is in the cash flow. So for every $1 you increase the cash flow of a property, you're going to increase the value of the property by $10. Now think about this. If I was going to give you $10 for every one that you gave me, how many ones would you give me? As many as possible, right? Because that's just like, it's like printing money. It's like having your own printing machine. And that's why in my system, I give you over 19 different ways to increase the value of your property using what's called value plays. Now write that down. That's a big part of the system. Buying properties with value plays. What's a value play? A value play is a property that has a small problem, and we fix that problem to create a lot of equity. So a value play is an opportunity for us as investors to fix a small problem and create a lot of equity. Now, for instance, most of the time you're not even doing the fixing. One of the value plays is, let me just mention this, and this is very important. Value plays only work if you buy based on, and write this down, if you buy based on actual numbers. Actual numbers. Sellers try to sell based on what's called pro forma numbers, but you want to buy based on actual numbers because those are the numbers that are really happening today. Pro forma numbers are numbers that they think are going to happen a year from now. Well, what if they never happen? Who's stuck? You'll be stuck with a property that's not performing properly. So always buy based on actual numbers. And because of that, you can do value plays like property that has low rents. You buy a property with low rents, you buy it based on the actual numbers, you raise those rents, and you've increased the value of the property.